into who I am and what I do and how I come into all this here in a moment. But first, I want to open with a story, a legend. Where I come from in western North Carolina, it's the home of the Cherokee Indians. It's a beautiful landscape. And you're going to see in the lecture we're about to give here on giant skeletons some of the landscape and why I love where I live so much. And what's so fascinating to me about this area is that the mythological history of the Cherokees involves a lot of what we can only call inhuman beings. They're little people. They're spirit folk. And the one thing you don't find a whole lot of, interestingly, are giants. However, there is one legend, and we're going to dig into it a little more deeply here. This was kind of the impetus for my interest in the subject, was this one legend. And it was carried over to the anthropologist James Mooney by a man in the early 1800s. And he, of course, being of Cherokee descent, had said that one of his ancestors had told him about this strange being. In fact, there was an entire group of beings, slant-eyed giants. They were known as the giants from the West. They came, they spent time with the Cherokee, and then they left and went back to the West where they had come from. Now this is one of two legends that include also the Cherokee god of the hunt that involve giants. And what's interesting about this, and the curious lack of reports of giants in that history, is that unlike a lot of the other spirit beings, I found it very interesting that there's only one reference to a group of large beings that came and spent time with the Cherokee and then left. Now people say, of course, oh, that's just a folk tale. It's just a mythic tradition. There's no way that we can base any factual evidence that we have access to today on this, and that we can substantiate this as being more than just a legend. Or is there? Now, something else that we're going to be looking at throughout the course of this lecture is something that David and I and Dr. Schock and I, and you, we've all kind of had esoteric jam sessions, as we like to say. I'm a musician, and so improvisation is part of what we do. But we've talked a lot about this debate between belief and skepticism. We're going to get into a lot of skepticism with this. There are people who call me a skeptic. There are people who say that I'm so open-minded my brain might fall out of my head. I like to think I'm somewhere in the middle. And frankly, I think that there's both room for skepticism and also room for open-mindedness in this debate. And what more modern skeptics are going to try and tell you is there's nothing to what you're about to see here. I stand in favor of the contrary position, that there is something to this, and that, in fact, I think that we have to be open-minded in what we look at. We also have to be discerning just as well. I do think that there are giant skeletons, and we'll look at why. And we're going to look at some of these mythic traditions as well, and perhaps how the modern evidence that we have access to, maybe more so now than ever, can help substantiate some of these legends. This, of course, being one of these famous, and you're going to see throughout the lecture a lot of these famous newspaper articles that, again, the modern skeptic would probably say, oh, those are all newspaper hoaxes. We know, of course, David and I especially, that all those old newspaper reports from back in the 1800s, they were all hoaxes. Those people, these newspapermen would write anything just to try and, make up a story. Maybe that's just not quite the case, and I think we'll see as we progress here today that there indeed maybe is a little more to it. Now, I'm Micah Hanks, and as I've told you, I live in western North Carolina. This is one of many, that's me. Can you see me up there? This is one of many reasons why I love western North Carolina. This is, of course, a sheer cliff, and that, God, it's probably a several thousand-foot drop that goes way down into this ravine between this cliff face and what's called Table Rock in the Linville Gorge. Table Rock, of course, is one of the many locations where a famous earthlight phenomenon, or maybe if we were to apply a more modern scientific term to it, earthquake lights is what they're supposed to be. But this is the side of the Brown Mountain Lights phenomenon. It's been long discussed in a lot of esoteric literature. I've been fascinated with that. And, of course, Table Rock was also known as the mystic altar of the Cherokee people. And I spent a lot of time up there, and I'm telling you, when you go to the top of a cliff and look down on the world, you feel like you're a bird flying. It's hard not to get a mystical sensation almost when you experience places like this in nature. It's truly beautiful. And then when I'm not out there in the wilds of remote portions of the Americas, I'm at home doing this, writing about these kinds of things. And of course, reading these fantastic old fate magazines and things like that. I've recently been made a consulting editor to Fate magazine, which is a real blessing, because I think a lot of us as researchers probably, if we didn't get our start writing for magazines like Fate, we've certainly learned a lot from reading them over the years. So this is the other thing that we do, and I think that that's what's so interesting about researchers in this field, is that we get to kind of juxtapose this adventure lifestyle versus staring at what we collectively might call the one-eyed retina-burning monster known as the laptop computer screen. So it's really hard on your eyes at times. This is Iseo, the river of many cliffs. The Limble River, which flows down. Table Rock is just across the ridge over there. This was another ancient Cherokee site. They believed that this river held incredible mystic power, and also, of course, it was used for ritual killings in ancient times. The story is that this is overlooking Limble Falls, and if you were standing looking at this, the water flows down around you, and then there's a huge drop right there. And it was said that if you weren't scalped often, the Cherokee would actually take people and they would send them off this waterfall and they would plummet to their death. Iseo, the river of many cliffs. So amidst all these fascinating Cherokee legends, oh, and one more thing also I'll show. This is another clip that I found. Petroglyphs kind of tie into this mythology as we're about to see. I'm going to show you one of my favorite ancient petroglyph sites in western North Carolina and what this has to do with the tradition of giants in this region. On this cliff face, when you're digging around, often you find a lot of these things. And part of what I like to try and do when I'm looking for ancient sites is I like to try and find and document petroglyph finds throughout not just western North Carolina, but anywhere else that I travel to. A lot of them are documented, some of them are not. And on this location, which is located actually a little town called Girton, western North Carolina, I found this petroglyph. Now this looks more modern, but what's significant about this one, just as an example of the petroglyphs that I found, is that while this looks like a T, it could also be interpreted as a cross. And Scott Walter, a colleague of mine who has a program on history channel called America Unearthed, has said this resembles somewhat what he calls the hooked X, which he believes may be evidence of course, not Templars, Masons coming to the Americas possibly much earlier than modern historians would suspect that they had actually been here. This is a very difficult location to get to. I had to climb sheer to the top of a mountain. As far as I know, I don't think that this is a documented petroglyph in western North Carolina, so your eyes may be some of the first that actually see this. Now, for all I know, it also could just be Tom Zabuba, who carved his initials there in the rock. Of course, they look very old, and that's what caught my eye about them. I notified Scott and Janet, his wife, about this, and unfortunately they said that it would be very difficult to get a film crew down to climb to the top of that mountain and to take a look at this. And so the best I might be able to do is present an etching and, of course, put my hand up there for comparison. I'll remember to get a manicure next time. Okay. Now, when it comes to these petroglyph sites, I just showed you a slightly more esoteric petroglyph. Nobody probably knows about that last one. This one is very well known. This is called Judaculla Rock. It's located in a little area near Cullowhee, North Carolina. There's a university there as well. This is a very ancient soapstone boulder. It's very large. I would say it's probably maybe half the size of that wall. And Judaculla Rock, it's one of the famous sites in western North Carolina. Years and years ago, there was a serious concern that Judaculla Rock may actually be sinking into the ground. It was becoming covered with mud. And you can actually see here there's this darker upper portion of the rock, and then this lighter lower portion. That actually is the portion that for the last probably 100 years or so had not been exposed. During my most recent visit to Judaculla Rock, I had a couple of friends formerly that worked with Bell Laboratories from Pennsylvania. They came down, they wanted to see it. I took them out there, and I was very pleased to see that there has actually been a recent excavation where they have removed the earth and exposed more of Judaculla Rock. On the opposite side coming around, you can also see portions. This is what the Cherokee had actually used Judaculla Rock for. In addition to all these markings, you can see these petroglyphs. Some have supposed that this is a map and that these are perhaps remnants of an ancient language, or possibly these are pictorial references to different kinds of animals and things like that. I think it may be a combination of all these sorts of things. Also, as you can see, they would remove portions of the stone so that they could create bowls. These impressions are where the beginnings of bowls were being made, and they would carve these portions out and scrape down and make kind of like a stone kind of bowl. This is something that the Cherokee were known to do. But what's truly fascinating about this is that while the stone is believed to be Cherokee in origin, in other words, they are believed to have been the ones that made the carvings, nobody really is certain if Judaculla Rock was carved by the Cherokee who moved into the region. Some estimates, there have been, and I can't source this was only told to me by a person with the division of I'm trying to remember where she worked for. She was associated with Western Carolina University in the area. A woman named Kari Yates had told me that there had been a determination by state geologists that had thought that this stone could be much older, possibly 3,000 to 5,000 years, maybe as much as 10,000 years old.